Here we go. Welcome, everybody, to what's going to be a pretty exciting evening. I'm here with Mark Trenger, and my name is Sharon Weiss-Greenberg. I'm the Executive Director of JOFA, and we run many very interesting programs, and one of them is going to happen tonight from wherever you are tuning in. Before I introduce Mark, I just want to tell you a little bit about what JOFA is doing, what's coming up. We are an advocacy organization. We're looking to better improve, expand the role of women in the Orthodox community, in addition to bettering the Orthodox community. We address issues ranging from women in leadership positions to engaging women in ritual, to addressing abuse in the community, rabbinic misconduct, rabbinic authority, to LGBTQ inclusion and beyond. There's a lot of work to do, and I think that there is a fair amount of white noise out there in terms of the blogosphere, the media, about what people think should be happening in the community, what is actually happening in the community, and that's why tonight is very exciting. We have Mark Trenger here, who is conducted, he'll let me know, but I think it may be the first ever quantitative research on this subject, or certainly in terms of recent research. Mark Trenger retired from his business career, much of it in marketing research, in 2015. He has also taught undergraduate and graduate business and statistics courses at 3 universities, and over the years has been active in many Jewish organizations in the Hartford, Connecticut area, including the Federation, Jewish Community Center. He was chair of the Hartford Jewish Film Festival. He was president of a synagogue, day school and kashrut commission, and active in Israel advocacy. He started Nishma Research in July 2015 as a way to meld his business expertise with his knowledge of the Jewish community, and with the goal of providing Jewish organizations with quality, affordable research, for which we are grateful. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon. I appreciate it.
And here you go.
Thank you. So can you all see me in the little window? Great. Okay, so just as background, I'm going to be going through a deck that I prepared on the results of our survey. We call the survey Starting a Conversation, a pioneering survey of those who have left the Orthodox community. It is actually the first quantitative survey of this group. The study was released in June. In my deck, there will be there's a page that has a link so you can actually see and download the survey questionnaire, a press release that we came out with, the full study report, which is about 100 pages, a summary version of it that's only 8 or 9 pages, and then there's a full report on the modern Orthodox segment and a summary there, and also a bunch of articles. So that's all posted on the website, and that'll be included in the deck. I'm going to bring up the deck now. So here we go.
And I'm just going to add, while you're doing that if anybody has questions, there's a Q&A feature box that is open, and feel free to submit questions, and we hope to get to as many as possible.
Okay, great. And so as the questions come in, if they come in fast and furious, we'll handle as many of them as we can. If there's too many to respond to as I'm going through the results, then I may just put together a response and email it out to everybody. Okay, so just as background, there have been a lot of memoirs and anecdotes on this subject, and I kind of went through my memory, and here are just some of the books that I've read. I do tend to read a lot of books. These are not all memoirs and anecdotes. Most of the ones on the top 2 rows are. On the bottom row, Hush and I Am Forbidden are novels that are based to some extent on true facts. And then there's a book that was done maybe about 8 years ago, which is kind of an analysis based on qualitative research, a lot of interviews. But this has always intrigued me, the stories of people from this community. I mean, I myself grew up in Flatbush, and I'm from I would say it's kind of a yeshivish family, although yeshivish in the days when that movement was just really starting out. I have relatives that are in the Hasidic community, so I've always been intrigued. But there's never been any quantitative study. There's been a lot of memoirs, and somebody said the plural of anecdote is not data. So it occurred to me that would it not be interesting to actually do a survey of these people and get some statistics about it? So I took a shot, and I messaged Shulam Dean, who wrote the All Who Go Do Not Return National Book Award winner. I messaged him on Facebook. We met in Brooklyn in a cafe. He liked the idea. He shared it with people at Footsteps, where he's on the board. I spoke to people at Project Macomb, which is another organization that provides services to people who leave their community. I noticed a lot of, I kind of floated the idea on some social media, and I spoke to a number of academics. One of them was Professor Stephen Cohen, who was very excited about it and decided to participate as a member of an advisory board. So we did decide to do a study, and we expanded it because a lot of the, most of the memoirs have been in the Haredi community, which would be the Hasidish or Yeshivish, with the exception possibly of Shalom Auslander, who I would categorize as Yeshivish, between Yeshivish and modern Orthodox, but a lot of it was from the Hasidic community. We decided to expand it to cover the modern Orthodox as well. So in the end, we got a lot of responses, enough to analyze each of these groups separately. The Hasidic, excluding Chabad, the Chabad, the Yeshivish, and the modern Orthodox. And you see here the link on the bottom to a website that has all the reports. You know, one of the questions that came up, this has come up twice this week, and that is about the use of the term OTD, off the derech. And as this footnote is actually taken from the full report, those who have left Orthodoxy are often referred to as OTD, off the derech. They sometimes refer to themselves that way as well. And I know that some people like the term and some do not like it so much. The group that's adopted the term, including the Facebook group, has done it with a little bit of kind of an in-your-face attitude. This is who we are, and even a little bit of a kind of pride in the term. So they are perhaps using it a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But it is true that there are some people who like it and some who don't. We use it here in our report occasionally because it's a lot faster to say OTD than to say those who have left the Orthodox community.
Can you speak to, just for a second, why the division, the different categories that you created? And I'm curious to know if all of them associate with the term off the derech, or if that tends to happen in the ultra-Orthodox communities more so than the modern Orthodox community.
Okay, so we started out with the Hasidic, and several people, including Shulam, said you have to really separate the Chabad from the other Hasidim because they are so different in their insularity and in the extent to which they interact with society. In the end, as you'll see in the results, that was true. They are very, very different. The Yeshivish group is also part of that Haredi, and some of these memoirs and a lot of the interviews have actually been with the Yeshivish group, more with the Hasidish, but the Yeshivish as well. I decided to include the modern Orthodox because I'm interested in that group, because I am aware, being modern Orthodox, that there are people in the modern Orthodox community who do go off the derech, and my take on it is that there may be many more in that community. I don't have statistics, but that's just my take on it. In the study itself, as you'll see, here we go. The first two questions, which you'll see here on the right, were you raised as Orthodox? And if they said yes, fully or partially, then we continued with the survey. So everybody in the survey was raised as Orthodox. Are you still a member of the Orthodox community? If they said fully, we excluded them. If they said I'm somewhat or not at all, we included them. So everybody in the survey was raised Orthodox, fully or partially, and they no longer considered themselves fully a part of that community. This was true across all segments. So if someone, for the 230 or so people, and then you can see the pie chart on the bottom, who ended up completing the survey, they were modern Orthodox people who all were raised Orthodox and no longer are fully in that community. So by definition, these two questions, as a screener of our survey, assured that all of the 885 people who responded are all what we call off the derech. They're all people who had an Orthodox upbringing and are no longer that way. On the left side, and I'll go through this very quickly, but just so you know, there is no census, there's no list, there's no mailing list that I could get. For a lot of research, you could buy a list and send out 1,000 questionnaires. In the case here, there really was no list, and these people are often they're not out there, they're not public. A lot of them want to get away from their community of origin, so it was very challenging to find these people for the survey. Both the organizations I mentioned, Footsteps and Project Macomb, sent this survey to their entire membership list, as well as announced it at events. So it went out to about 1,500 people that way. It went out to it was posted to the homepage of the Off the Derech Facebook group and several other groups that kind of are frequented by people who have a Jewish connection or had a Jewish connection or are interested in Judaism. They all went through these 2 questions as a screener, so all 885 are off the derech. But just so you know, that's the process. It was an opt-in survey, which is not ideal, and this is something that Professor Cohen and I talked about a lot. In this case, it was really the only way to get these people. Later on, if you want, I can talk a little bit about whether there was any bias in the responses.
Can I ask you one quick question? To my knowledge, Project Macomb is an organization that was almost founded in response to Footsteps as a way for people who identify as ultra-Orthodox, who want to leave the ultra-Orthodox community, to see sort of a middle ground in modern Orthodoxy. And I'm curious to know if they consider themselves off the derech as a part of the modern Orthodox community. Okay,
so that's true. Footsteps on the issue of religion, they're agnostic, by which I mean they provide the services they provide are in socialization, education, all sorts of services they provide to these people who have left the Hasidic world primarily, and these people truly are strangers in a strange land, and they need a lot of help. And Footsteps provides them. Footsteps does not promote religion. Because these people, that's not what they're looking for. Okay. Now, Project Macomb, their take on it is there are people who are Hasidic and want to leave the Hasidic community, so perhaps they can find a home in a more modern Orthodox environment. So Project Macomb also provides some of these same services. Similarly, they also have workshops, get-togethers, lectures, programs about job searching and socialization, but the presentation of Judaism and Orthodoxy as positive is something they include in their goal. So they are different. Whether Project Macomb was a reaction to Footsteps, that I don't know. I mean, Footsteps has been around for 10 years, and Project Macomb for less than that. So,
maybe not reaction to Footsteps, but a reaction to the reality that there are people from the ultra-Orthodox community who want to leave, and it's sort of this middle ground where you can engage in society, you can learn English, you can have jobs, you can have an education, and still remain Orthodox.
Right. You will also see on the lower. Can you see the entire screen, by the way?
I can. Hopefully, everyone else can too.
Okay, good. So you'll see on the lower left, this report focuses. This report focuses on the overall results. Some of what I say will be overall. Some of them will be particularly for the modern Orthodox segment, because I think that may be more relevant to a lot of our participants, a lot of our listeners. And then there's additional analysis by gender, male versus female. There was in the lower right, you'll see a little box there. One question from a webinar attendee that was sent in before is define Orthodox. Well, like all these surveys, like the Pew survey and like the New York Population Studies survey, the definition of Orthodox is really, it's as self-defined by people responding to a survey. So we ask them how they categorize themselves. And if they check off modern Orthodox, that's what they are. Now, we know that could mean a lot of different things. We know that, and that changes over time. Modern Orthodox at one time meant I'm a member of a modern Orthodox synagogue, but in terms of belief and practices, it may not be what we consider it today. So is it basic Shomer Shabbat? Is it membership in Orthodox? It's a lot of different things. It's really people defining themselves as modern Orthodox. I think for the Hasidic and for the Hasidic Chabad, that's less of an issue. And for the Yeshivish, there was a category called other, and about 8% of people said other, and the others were really amalgam. So a lot of people said kind of between Yeshivish and modern Orthodox, between Hasidish and Yeshivish. They were kind of in between. But
okay.
So this, just a very quick profile of survey respondents. Just so you know why I picked these two photos. I couldn't pick two more different photos, right? That's true, and one of the reasons is because the Haredi and the modern Orthodox are just very, very different. The Orthodox, people who've gone off the derech from the Haredi world and those who've done it from the modern Orthodox world are very, very different in terms of their reasons for doing so, the issues they face, their challenges, and their current beliefs and the current practices that they have retained. So that's why I picked these two photos. Just going very quickly, overall, we've got half men, half women about. In terms of age, they were young. The Hasidic was a median age 29, the modern Orthodox older, age 37. In terms of education, what you'd expect, Hasidic less educated, only about 1 in 4 college graduate. The modern Orthodox, very highly educated, 85%, more than half have a postgraduate degree. Half employed. Household income, again, what you'd expect, about 100,000 median among modern Orthodox, in the 40 to 50 range for the other groups. You can see below that married, 36% married currently. About 1 in 3 had a child and left the community. Family background. 32% of these people had one or both parents Baalei Tshuva, and it was very high in the Chabad group, which I kind of looked at and said, that's high. I think that's higher than it is. Is it higher? I don't know. It just seems high to me compared to the Orthodox community as a whole.
I would imagine. I mean, that's what Chabad is so good at. Is shlichut is I think the term that they use. So it makes sense.
But it also tells me that their parents made a major change in their lives.
Right.
They were seeking a different life. So, maybe somehow that was those same characteristics are in the children. And time since leaving, the overall the Hasidic on average left 5 years ago, the modern Orthodox 9 years ago. So apparently it's been going on longer among the modern Orthodox. In terms of where they live, because our survey was done by these email lists and the Facebook groups and social media, we did get a pretty wide dispersion over the United States and foreign countries. But a lot of them are in the greater New York area. So the key question starting out is why people left their community. Just so you know how we came up with this, we did in early drafts of the survey, we had a question that said, which of these did you experience in your growing up in your community of origin? And it was a long list that had things like sexual abuse or physical or domestic violence or learning disabilities or issues as a dating, issues as an aguna. It was a list of about 40 items, and we looked at it and we thought that people would check off the ones that they experienced, and that would tell us why they left. And then we quickly decided that really was not going to work because people would be checking off a lot of different things. And were they really the reasons why people left? Also, we didn't really want to present that in a survey because we thought that would be triggering. We thought some of these people are kind of traumatized, and the last thing they wanted to do is get a survey where the question on the second page says, were you a victim of sexual abuse? It would probably terminate the survey. So we decided to ask an open-ended question, fully open-ended. Please think back to when you started moving away in belief or practice from the Orthodox community in which you were raised. What were the key things that caused your beliefs and practices to change? This is like probably the 15th version of the wording of that question. But this is really what caused you to change your beliefs or practices. And they could write as much as they want. We had people who wrote well over 300 words in response to this question. And what we did then was we had hundreds and hundreds of responses, and we read every one of them, and we categorized about 50 different reasons that people were giving, and then we tallied every one. So really what we're getting is kind of top of mind. It isn't a checklist, we're asking you the question, what caused your beliefs and practices to change? And some people just gave very brief answers, where we might have checked off one item. Some gave very long answers, we might have checked off a half a dozen items. But so, for example, if they mentioned the status of women, the role of women, we would check that off. So the process was reading through all of these open-ended questions, and that's how we came up with the list.
Right. Basically, it's not like there was a checklist to make sure that there was no sort of bias. You had a team code for different themes. You identified 50 themes, and these were the top ones that you shared with us today.
Exactly. We tallied all of them. There were a lot of them.
I also think this is interesting in that I think when people looked, turned to the books that were written that you shared in the beginning of your slideshow, a lot of people say, well, the people who leave are those who have been abused or are on the fringe or had something wrong with their family or what have you. And this research is really telling a very different story.
Right. So this research is the first time that we can see the value of moving from the anecdotes, from the memoirs, to the data. So, for example, I'll give you just one example. So you'll notice that the issue of a poor secular education is not among the top 20. If you read the memoirs, it comes up a lot. It comes up a lot. But and for those people that have left and are authors and write, secular education is important to them. They're educated people. But among everybody, it was on the list. Only 2% mentioned it. More among the Chabad and Yeshivish. But so this is just one example of where the memoirs, the issues that are key to some of those people, are not among the top issues mentioned. So you can see here this is for all 885 people together, and you can see the top issues are kind of the influence of outside knowledge. Things I read, things I learned, contradictions. A lot of people said no proof. Second item, I thought for myself. People mentioned intellectual thought, thinking, preference for rationality. A lot of people just said, I lost my faith. I just had doubts. I lost my faith. You can see that there are subtle differences between these. It was very challenging to kind of go through them and kind of categorize them. But we had the benefit of reading through longer comments. Overall, the role and status of women is the number 4 item. It's 11%. And a lot of people mentioned the word hypocrisy was the most often used word in the responses. People mentioned hypocrisy and how people were dealt with, double standards and how people were dealt with. And then you can see some of the other items here.
Can I ask about the hypocrisy? Does that mean that the leadership was hypocritical or were we talking about something else?
A lot of it, most of it was about the leadership was hypocritical, and some of it was about people were hypocritical and how they treated others.
Like in terms of ethics or business practice or more those sorts of things.
Exactly. So we had a couple of questions beforehand. One person said, I have the impression that for better or worse, the Orthodox movement has evolved more to the right. Do you think the OTD movement is a side effect of this kind of evolution? I think we can probably say as a fact that Orthodox Judaism has moved to the right. Is it a factor? If you go down to the top 10, so the 6th item was, people mentioned the way religious practice has evolved, chumras, the minutia, no spirituality. If you go down a little bit lower, no questions, or not allowed to ask questions, or questions are not answered. So, these, you'd have to read through the comments. Very few people said, well, Orthodoxy has moved to the right. They didn't say it in those many words, but I suppose we could go through all of the comments and kind of pick up on movement to the right. I think the chumras and minutias in the 6th item down was kind of my effort and religious practice. Those people who mentioned it. So yeah, I think it's a fact. I think it's a factor, but it's not the main factor. The movement of Orthodoxy to the right is not the main factor. But on the other hand, I look at the top item, things I read, learned, contradictions. Mm-hmm. Go down, lower down, where it says, I can't, no questions, unanswered questions. I can't ask questions. Those kind of seem to be tied together. Mm-hmm. So, was there a time that we were more open to asking asking questions? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm
not sure if you want to do it now, if you want to save for later the role of women, because obviously I have some questions.
That's actually going to be the next slide. But let's see. The other question, how much of this exodus is due to fears of Orthodoxy being overrun by the right-wing fundamentalist movement? No, we didn't really see people fleeing orthodoxy because of fear of it's kind of the same question. No fear of its being overrun. You know, it is related to the movement to the right. And how much can be attributed to what some view as laxity or hypocrisy in the modern Orthodox movement. So I will say this, and that is that I think, as we show in the next slide, modern Orthodoxy. So here are the top factors in modern Orthodoxy. And here you can see the top two are that, and I combined the things we learn and think about and conflicts with what I've been taught is 22%. The role and status of women is 22%. The role and status of women as a factor causing people to leave is much higher among the modern Orthodox than it is among the Haredi world. If you look down to the seventh item down, community hypocrisy double standards at 8%, that was 10% overall. It's 8%. So I was actually surprised in answer to the other question that the person asked. Yeah, there's perception of community double standards and hypocrisy among the modern Orthodox, a little bit lower than among the Haredi, but it's there as well. Notice the fifth item, my sexual orientation, much higher among the modern Orthodox than among the Haredi.
Interesting, yeah.
Now, in answer to your question about men versus women, okay, so this is for the modern Orthodox, men versus women. And you can see there were some very significant differences. So the first item is what I call the thinking about it, intellectual thought, things that I learned conflict with what I'd been taught, very high for men and women, higher for men. And the second item down, the role and status of women, so 37% of modern Orthodox women who left said in their open-ended response, they included that in their remember, this was not a checklist. They had to actually write that in their response, which I think this statistic is just really, really high. When you
so can I ask you, what were examples of what they said that would have been coded under this category?
So I actually have 2 pages of verbatim comments that we'll get to very soon. In the full report, there are many more pages.
So let me ask one question also about the top 2 categories for the modern Orthodox community were essentially intellectual conflicting thoughts or what have you, and the role and status of women. In terms of intellectualism, is that part of the Torah Sinai conversation, or being able to question certain prophetic texts?
It's those things. It's the Torah Sinai. It's you know, I read Dawkins. I'm an atheist. I see no proof. It has become more apparent to me over time that Judaism is a man-made religion. I'm learning things about the age of the world and the age of the universe, and they conflict. So it's all those things about thinking. It's all the things, and if you see lower down, it says it was a gradual process. A lot of people check that as well. But it's really just a thought process. They were turned off over time. They just were open to secular knowledge, and they couldn't resolve inconsistencies between secular knowledge and traditional Jewish values and ideals and thinking. And so it just kind of drove them out. So a good segue then is one of the questions, coming from a marketing background, before doing this, one of the things we always look at is the push versus pull. So like when you build a website, do you push your content out to people or do you draw them in? I thought a push versus pull analysis might be worthwhile, because I've always liked the term pushed off the derech. To what extent is the community pushing people out?
Yeah.
Pushing people. So in other words, they're being pushed out by our society, or are they being pulled out by the outside society? Or is it both? So we actually went through all of the reasons, and we categorized them. Some of them are clearly being pushed out. When you talk about community hypocrisy, you're being pushed out. when you talk about some of these items are being pulled out by the outside society. I was exposed to a lot of non-Jewish people, and I see that they are often just as ethical, or even more so than some of the people in my community. So you could say that that's being pulled out, depending on how they phrased it, and some of them we really couldn't figure out. But what was really interesting to find out was that it's more of a push than a pull, which means that more often the community is pushing people away from it, and less often is the outside world pulling people out of the community, which is interesting. That has a lot of implications. That means that there are things in the community that can be addressed to respond to the concerns people have. For example, educationally. It means that maybe we don't need to worry as much about the lure of the outside world, the internet, although I don't want to understate that is a factor. But it was just interesting to me to see the push versus pull. And you can see there underneath the graph, you can see that it's similar, even more of a push out of the community from the modern Orthodox, which surprised me. I would have expected that in the modern Orthodox, it was the pull, the lure of the outside world more than in the others. But
I actually think it makes sense because the modern Orthodoxy community is fairly exposed. You're going to secular college campuses and what have you. So it's not, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But
I mean, the modern Orthodox person has come to an accommodation with society, and they've
right.
Yeah. So the question that was asked here, has any strategy proven effective in bringing disaffected young people back to some level of identification? Well, you have the Project Makom, the Jew in the City. There are efforts to bring people back. I know there are people who, Judaism is very fluid. If you look at the Pew survey, the other surveys, the Federation studies, the National Population Survey of 2000, and you see the history of where people have changed from one denomination to another. It's just surprisingly huge. As people are constantly shifting denominations, much more than we think. We think things are, I thought things were kind of more or less static, with some people moving from one denomination to another, but actually there was a lot of shift. Then the other question, what mustn't other Jewish groups do in order to prevent their members from leaving, based on your research? Well, I think the clear answer is that there are issues within the community that are causing people to leave, that are pushing people out. So what Jewish groups, however you define groups, should do is figure out how to address those issues.
I just want to point out that the questions that Mark is answering are questions that were submitted through about an hour before this webinar, but there is a Q&A option through the Google Hangout that you can ask a question. If for whatever reason you're not comfortable with that, feel free to shoot me an email, sharon@jofa.org, SHARON@JOFA.org.
Right, and I can see the window here with the questions, so as they come up, I'll respond. So I do have 2 pages of verbatim comments. These are from the modern Orthodox. I divided them by men and women. For the men, I chose a graphic, which is the Time magazine cover from a while back, Is the Bible Fact or Fiction? Because as I mentioned, among the men, an issue was more the intellectual thought and contradictions and doubts. Just to read a couple of them very quickly. One, I was exposed to new worldviews and philosophies that I preferred to Judaism. 2, following halacha made me anxious and made me feel bad about myself whenever I violated it. The 3rd one, disagreement with elements of Orthodox theology, role of women, perspectives on non-Jews, attitude towards sexuality. So you can see in that one comment that the person wrote about 12 words, I ended up checking a whole bunch of categories. You can see the role of women,
Right.
etc. But so there are a lot of comments, and our plan actually is to post all of the comments online, which I haven't done yet. I do want to go through them one more time. I need to if there's anything in any comment that can lead to anybody thinking they know who the person is, I'm going to edit that out, but they will be extremely lightly edited. and I think reading them would be very, very worthwhile. I also have a page of verbatim comments by women, also modern Orthodox, and here we show an accomplished woman. That is Janis Yellen, who's Jewish and who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. And so to me that kind of signifies a lot of women were saying, hey, I work in a company where our general counsel is a woman, the director of my department is a woman, and what's up with us? So that's why I chose that. A couple of comments. I was appalled at the racism in the Orthodox community. I was upset about the inherent misogyny of Orthodox Judaism. The word misogyny was used a lot. Yeah, I mean, the word role of women was used more, but enough people used misogyny so that flavor definitely crept in. As a queer person, I felt the homophobia inherent in the Orthodox worldview was out of touch with reality. You had there was a lot of that as well. As you saw earlier, my sexual orientation was very high on the list for the Orthodox. I'll just read the second one. As a woman, I could not face a life of being a second-class citizen or marrying an Orthodox man who would always see me as lesser. By the way, we got some comments from men, but I was unfortunately surprisingly few. Not as many men were upset with the status of women, which was kind of a disappointment to me.
But modern Orthodox, it was 17%, was it? 16%?
7%, yeah, 7% of the men said that, which I guess you could say. I mean, don't forget this is a volunteered comment. So for many of these men, they may be upset about it, and they may have had negative thoughts about it, but it rose to the level of a factor that caused them to change their beliefs and practices. 7%, which is much higher than among the Haredi.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There was also, just very quickly, double lifers. We did ask a question about, are you leading a double life? Meaning you're outwardly still a member of the community in terms of your appearance and visible actions, but internally you don't view themselves that way. These are sometimes called, I think they're called like the
orthoprax.
Orthoprax, or there's some kind of play on words of Maranos of it. But they're people who look the look, and many of them in the Hasidic world, but they don't believe it. But for various reasons, usually family, Shalom Bayis family, they're still in their community. So you can see that overall, 1/3 of respondents said they were leading a double life. And among this group, 39% said it's very or somewhat likely they will leave the community at some time in the future, which means that 61% of them are in for the long ride. They have decided that although their beliefs and practices are not at the level of their co-religionists, they are staying in their community, and they have good reasons for doing that.
But it sounds like social bonds, either family or ties to the community or what have you, is probably the strongest reason for people staying.
The strongest reason is family, but also social bonds and a sense of community. I remember I was listening to the Unorthodox podcast, which some of you might listen to. It's very good, and they were talking to Shulam Dean right around the time of somebody's unfortunate suicide, and the people on the podcast said, why would anyone want to leave the community? Because you have such a sense of community, and we tend to forget that in American society. There are a lot of people that have no sense of community. And here you have people who say, I feel there's a sense of community, I'm staying. So it was family and community. Okay, so moving on to the second part of the survey, and we can go a little bit faster now. So we asked them about support they received or needed when they started moving away. And among the Haredi, well over half received support. Among the modern Orthodox, a little bit less than half received support. The Haredi, and you can see where they got the support from, footsteps or friends. But what's interesting is that across all the groups, more than between half and 3/4 wanted additional support. They got some support. They wanted additional support. You can see in the comments below, among people who wanted additional support, a lot of them just did not know where to go for support. They had no idea where to go. Some of the organizations that exist now did not exist at that time. So they wanted it, they didn't know where to get it, and they struggled with that issue.
And what does that mean, support? Does that vary from the different categories, from the Chabad to Hasidic to Yeshivish to modern Orthodox?
Yeah, in the full report, it does vary. There's a question later on saying, what are your current needs? What support do you need now? You'll see later on that the number one issue is actually the same across all the groups, although there's a lot of differences within the groups as you go down the list between the modern Orthodox and the Haredi and etc. So we will get to that. You'll see those differences.
Great, thank you.
Where do they currently get their support? So interestingly, this the Orthodox Facebook group. Now, of course, we sent the survey to that group, so this may be because the percentage of them who responded might have been higher than the other groups. But among all respondents, 37% belonged to one or more online support groups. 63% did not belong to any online support groups. And then you'll see lower down, 21% belonged to one or more local support organizations. 79% did not belong to any local support organization. So it seems that a lot of these people have moved beyond the need for support, or at least that's what they're saying in terms of the support they get. Minorities are members of any virtual communities, and minorities are members of any physical communities.
Well, one interesting is anyone who is living, I love the language of double life. They can't necessarily be on Facebook unless they have a sort of a fake profile, right?
Well, you know, they can be. So there are some of these groups like the Off the Derech group. Some of them are closed groups, a high level of confidentiality. So I know, and I know Facebook has done away with their policy of letting people create fake profiles, although it's widely flaunted. There are people who create fake names and fake profiles. But you're right. The people that are the double lifers may be on an online group. There's no reason why they can't. I mean, they all have computers, or at least a lot of them do. They all have smartphones. Okay, so then there's a series of questions that was interesting, and that is, you know, what are these people who have left Orthodoxy, what are they actually doing now? What do they do? What do they believe? And how far have they drifted from where they started? So interestingly, you'll see that there's a lot of practices that they have maintained. So while only 1/3 believe in God and keep kosher, more than 2/3 still have a Friday night Shabbos meal. In the survey, we did call it Shabbos, because that's more the language of the Haredi world. And more than half light Shabbos candles. A lot of them do Jewish learning. A lot of them like Jewish music, especially the Hasidish. Very high percentages for children being raised religious. And this may be children that this is children that they had at the time they left. So there may be, there's issues there in terms of child care. But a lot of them are raised religious, and a lot of them are in religious schools.
Wow.
This one I'll just go through very quickly, but you can see here some of the differences. A couple of observations. In terms of the columns here are for all respondents, for the Haredi in our survey, for the modern Orthodox, and you can see the double lifers in our survey, and then some data from the Pew survey of American Jewry. A couple of observations, and one is that the modern Orthodox and the Haredi are different. For a lot of these religious practices or beliefs, the modern Orthodox have a higher level of belief and have maintained a higher level of practice than the Haredi. So it may be that that the modern Orthodox leaving their community was less traumatic, or their shifting to secular society was kind of flowed easier. But they tend to, so for example, belief in God, modern Orthodox 36%, Haredi 32%. Keeping kosher, modern Orthodox 36%. Haredi 29%. Jewish learning. So you can see that the
why do you think that is?
Well, I think for the one for the and the second one from the bottom, views, how would they feel if their child intermarried? So the modern Orthodox would be significantly more upset than the Haredi. You can see 32 versus 47. They just, I think the main thing is that the leaving of from their community was less traumatic. You see it later on. They've had better relationship with their parents. Their parents more often accept them and understand why they did what they did. And it just was not as difficult, not as jarring and traumatic, and not as sad. For the Haredi, especially the Hasidic, it was just more of a difficult transition. So they carried more negative baggage with them. So that seems to be the main reason.
Makes sense.
And then we asked them, how do you identify yourselves today? What's interesting is if you ask this in the Pew survey, 70% check off either Orthodox or conservative or Reform. Our group is post-denominational. Very few people checked off one of those denominational labels. Most of them said something like, you can see cultural or ethnic Jewish, or just Jewish, 35%, secular humanist Jewish, 8%, traditional, 17%. So you have 60% of them that are saying, hey, I'm Jewish. And I'm not any of those labels that you put on all of your groups from the old days. I'm a new Jew. I'm Jewish, and I'm just Jewish, and I'm traditional, and that's what I am. They don't like labeling themselves. So I thought that was kind of interesting. In terms of community, how important is it to you to be Jewish, and how important is it to you to be part of a Jewish community? So the top bar is Jewish, and the bottom bar is Jewish community. So among all the respondents, 72% said it's important being Jewish, and 51% said it's important being part of a Jewish community. You can see differences among the groups. You can see again that the modern Orthodox, 78% said it's important being Jewish. But clear majorities, strong majorities feel it's important being Jewish, and slight majorities feel it's important being part of a Jewish community. The bullet on the bottom here, women view being Jewish and women view being part of a Jewish community more important to them than men by about 10 percentage points. In terms of family relationships, how is your relationship with your father? 57% positive, with your mother, 62, with siblings, 67, with children. They all had positive relationships with their children, and the relationship with parents were kind of a glass half full, glass half empty. It doesn't surprise me that they had a better relationship with their mother than with their father. A couple of interesting observations. You'll see below, the modern Orthodox have significantly better relationships across the board by more than 10 percentage points. The second bullet, men have better family relationships than women by about 15 percentage points. The women who left the Orthodox community have a poorer relationship with their parents and siblings than do the men. And double lifers don't have, their relationships are about the same as everybody else. And my hypothesis is that they are double lifers, but their families, their parents and siblings kind of know what the deal is. So that's why their relationships are about the same as the others. We asked a couple of questions about, does your family accept you as you are? 53% agree, they do accept me. The fourth bar down, they understand the decisions I've made relating to my religious practices and beliefs. No, they don't. Only 34% said yes. There's not much understanding. They've come to accept me despite my decisions. Yeah, 50-50. This is for all groups combined. And it's better for the modern Orthodox. And for men versus women, you'll see the same thing we saw earlier with the relationship with parents and siblings. Again, acceptance and understanding women are a few percentage points lower than men in terms of their families accepting them and understanding them. And finally, over time, does it get better over time? Yeah, in terms of it does. It does. The relationships with the father and mother and siblings don't really. They kind of have a wavy pattern. But the two dotted lines, they accept me despite my decisions. That starts at about 25% and goes up to about 55% after 10 years. So over time, families come to accept their family members who have left their community. They understand the decisions I've made. Also, that starts at about 15%. That starts at almost no understanding at all. You know, why the heck is this person doing this? To close to 50%, well, in the low 40s. And you can see that in the little box on the right, the pattern for the modern Orthodox is the same. The only difference is that everything is kind of shifted up by about 15 or 20 percentage points.
But those individual relationships within the nuclear family, or so it seems, doesn't necessarily change. It doesn't get better.
No, it doesn't. I mean, that's a weird pattern, but I mean, it starts out like your relationship with your father. So it starts out at just under 50%, and it ends up at about 55%. So it doesn't go way up. Like, so the acceptance and the understanding do go way up, but the relationship goes up a little bit. You know, relationship encompasses a lot more than just acceptance and understanding. It also perhaps encompasses issues of that person's interaction with their community, you know, maybe issues of discomfort and shame. Okay, community, in terms of community connections, so interestingly, so 1/3 still feel connected to the Orthodox community where they grew up, and a lot of that might be the double lifers. Close to half feel connected to a new Jewish community. So they've left their Orthodox community, but now they're in a new Jewish community, and they feel connected to that. More than half among the modern Orthodox. Similarly, close to half have made connections to a non-Jewish community. So there's still a lot of community connections going on, although the numbers never get much higher than 50%, which is why the bottom line, I feel something is missing from my community connections, is also about 50%. So that 50%, people, about half seem to be happy with their community connections, about half are not. Among those who said something is missing, you can see some examples of the verbatim comments. Attachment to Israel. It's kind of similar to the Pew survey. 66% feel attached to Israel, 81% among modern Orthodox. Among all US Jews, the Pew surveys showed 69%. And then we asked the series about, are you active in the community? So about 1 in 4 currently active, and about 1 in 4 said, I'm not active, but I want to be. And you can see here among those, there are not a lot of differences, but the activity, the main activity would be in education and in the OTD community. Those are the top two. A lot of people active in, or who want to be active in, the LGBTQ community. You know, people want to be active in addressing abuse, sexual abuse, etc. 8% said they want to be active in secular educational reform. Among the people who said, this is among the people who said they want to be active. Remember, going way back, only 2% said that was the reason they left their community. So this is probably those people.
Well, I wonder if there's a difference between if that's why they left their community versus that's a huge challenge of trying to leave the community.
Yeah. So the earlier question, they just happened to mention the weak secular education when we asked them why their beliefs and practices changed. That was only 2%. Here later on, among people who, when we asked them, are you active? So among the people who are activists, 8% are currently active in secular educational reform of those who are active, and 8% of those who want to be active in that issue. So among the activists, that has risen. Now that doesn't surprise me. For the overall group, it may not be a huge deal, but it's enough of a deal that people who are activists, and we probably don't know some of them from their organizations, it's an issue that they've gravitated to.
Right.
And the final of this section is political leanings. So this is so the question asked about very conservative, moderate, liberal, very liberal. What I'm showing here is the percent liberal. The people who leave the Orthodox community tend to be liberal. You know, so the question is it a chicken or an egg? Are people who are in that community who tend to be liberal politically or progressive in their thinking, are they the people who would tend to more often leave the community? I think the answer is yes. On the other hand, are people who leave the community then members of a society that values liberal thinking or progressive thinking? I think the answer to that is probably yes also. So it might be a combination of things. But it's clear that this, as a group, these people are liberal and progressive. You can see this on a lot of the postings on Facebook, etc. Okay, it's 8:55, so I am going to go very quickly through the last few slides, and then we can have some questions. We asked about the question at the end said, what are the most important needs you may have at this time? And they were able to check up to 5. The number one need was, I want help in socializing more with people like myself. What's interesting is this does not go down over time. It stays high even for people who've been out of the community 5 years and 10 years. So that's just their number one need. Help in dating and relationships was number 2. Help in finding a job, emotional support, helping you feel you're part of a Jewish community. So these people have a lot of things that they a lot of services they can benefit from. Somebody asked the question, what can other Jewish groups do to help those leaving? So I would say this is the list. If you were a member of a Jewish group trying to help these people, this kind of can give you a map of what areas these people are looking for help in. We also in terms of past sources of support, we talked about this before. The number one source by far was friends. It was number one for all segments. It was number one for modern Orthodox, among men, among women. That's what they've gone to for support. At the end of the survey, after all these questions, we had 3 open-ended questions dealing with 3 aspects. And one is, what would you tell other people to help you understand people who've left the community? Another question is, what might you have done differently? And then the third one was, what advice would you give to those considering leaving? Now, the objective of the survey was to give people a voice. So we've gone through a lot of statistics, and I've always said that much of the value comes from reading through the comments. They're long. Some of them are short. A lot of them are long. A lot of them are thoughtful, poignant. Some of them are written so beautifully that you really couldn't believe. They're almost amazingly thoughtful and poignant. There's a sample of them here in the next 5, 6, 7, next 3 pages. You can actually see the wording. You can see the wording of the question up on top. Many people don't well understand those who have left or may leave their Orthodox community of origin. What do you want to tell people about this group? We have hundreds of long responses. You know, they want to tell you that they're hurt, they've been abused, they had to do this, they're not bad people. The problem is not them, there are problems in the community. They did this for a reason. They had to do this to live as happy people. A lot of them were critical of the community, but a lot of them basically talked about what it is in them, and what I want to tell you about our people. That we're not all doing all the terrible things that you read about, and that's not our motivation for leaving. But these are some very, very good comments. Like the bottom one, we're not all abused or mentally ill. We're not all looking to live a life of hefkeros, which is doing whatever you want without any repercussions. A lot of us feel fulfilled without Judaism. I feel more fulfilled in life now, etc. The second question at the end was, looking back at your experiences, what, if anything, would you have done differently? Interesting comments. A lot of people said, I would have left earlier. I would not have taken 10 years to think about it. Some said I would have made a plan and got my ducks lined up and left. So you can see that. A lot of people said I would have gotten an education. I would not have had children, birth control. I would have gone to college. And some people said I would have made an effort to find a community, like the second one from the bottom. I would have established myself in a modern Orthodox community with a shul I could enjoy, a rabbi I respect, and a feeling of spirituality. This is from somebody who's already modern Orthodox, but she wanted to stay in the community, and it just wasn't the right fit. So these are some interesting comments. The last question was, in conclusion, what advice would you give to others who are considering leaving their Orthodox community for a more modern lifestyle? A couple of people commented on the wording modern lifestyle, which probably is not exactly what we had intended. We probably should have said for a less insular lifestyle. But what advice would you give others? And here you can see some of those. Here you can see some of those. Look at the second one. Think it over twice and 3 times and 4 times before jumping. The change may be worse than the previous condition. There are a few people who have said, it was difficult. And it seems that they omit that to this day, they're not really sure it was the right thing. It was a difficult change. But a lot of people said that it was worth doing. Like you see where it says follow your star down the bottom. A lot of people said follow your intuition, follow your dreams. That word showed up a lot. Yeah. So there was a lot of, again, reading these comments is very, very helpful. At the website, everything will be posted. Everything is posted, including this deck. I'll post up there now. But you can see the questionnaire, press release, all the reports, a few articles that have appeared, and also on my website, there's a contact us button for future reports. If you're interested in marketing research, I am going to post some blog articles. I promise you they will be brief and easy to read, and things like things about market research that I think somebody in the Jewish community would find interesting. And, yeah, go ahead.
Let me add sorry. Let's try to bring it back to a little bit about some of Jofa's core missions. When it comes to the role of women, what were the specific problems that people had, and what might have kept them in the Orthodox community? Okay, so as far as can we see your face now? Are you able to do that?
Yeah. Let's see if I can do this.
You're putting
Oh, there
right. Hi.
So one of the reasons why we did the modern, we separated the modern Orthodox because they're very different from the Haredi. And then within that report, there's a lot of breakdowns from men versus women. If you download the modern Orthodox full report, almost every page in there breaks out men versus women. That would be the best source. Overall, you saw a huge difference in percentage on the question, why did your beliefs and practices change? 37% of the women, of the modern Orthodox women, said that was a reason. 7% of the men. So it really is, so clearly, in my view, I don't see modern Orthodox men as having the appreciation for the unhappiness of some of the women at their role, because they're not experiencing it personally. Although a few of the husbands, some of the men wrote it in respect to their wives. But then again, you have many people who are single. But so it isn't in their face. They don't see it.
Do you think anyone is being? I mean, that's a pretty high number. 37% of modern Orthodox women are stepping out. That's over a third of the women who are leaving because of their status in marriage or not having women leadership or what have you. Has any rabbinic authorities, organizations said, "Wow, that's a wake-up call"?
Well, I've heard that it's a wake-up call. I've heard people say,
I think it should be a wake-up call.
I've also seen articles in like Tradition magazine that kind of explain why things that have been proposed are not being done.
Mhm.
etc. And we've seen recent prominent modern Orthodox rabbis kind of backtracking and rethinking the issue of women studying Talmud. Uh,
Mhm.
and,
Right.
and the people who've
All
written
that
that,
knowledge that
you
they're
would
right.
actually, yeah, you would look at it and say, oh, he wrote it, and that's kind of surprising. And some of it is done because of concerns about the direction of the overall community. But it is an issue. And I think in answer to your question about are people thinking about what we can do to fix it, maybe individually, less than communally, except for JOFA as a communal organization.
Join JOFA, guys. But what else? Yeah. What do you think initiatives JOFA should be taking on? I think this is why we exist, right? Because there were a handful of people in Greenberg's living room, and all of a sudden there were over 1,400 people, and now we reach over 200,000 people through our platforms. So
I think to me, educating modern Orthodox men is clearly something that's needed.
Right.
Because, I did expect more women to give to raise the issue than men, but I thought the difference was very large. So that's an issue. I think there seems to be women who leave the Orthodox community across all the denominations, Hasidic, Chabad, Yeshivish, and modern Orthodox. The women seem to get the short end of the stick when it comes to their relationship with their family. So what does this mean? It's hard to kind of interpret, except there may be some education needed in how you treat women that have raised legitimate issues.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much there's so many ways to be looking at this research, and I'm sure that there is much more to think about and to be written on it. So thank you for providing grounded empirical research to highlight important issues that are worth being addressed for so many reasons. And thank you for being here tonight. And
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for tuning in. Jofa.org, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, contribute, write for us, be a part of us. Jofa is where all of you belong. And make sure to save the date, January 14th and 15th for the 9th International Jofa Conference, Columbia University, where again, we have over 1,000 people join in person and many more people virtually. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Good night.